We talked earlier in the quarter about the idea of the growth mindset. When one uses the growth mindset to get through difficult times, it's called productive persistence. We can encourage productive persistence in students with the type of feedback that we give them. I'm going to share some examples of how you can do that. Now, these are not my ideas. I'm sharing with you some information that I got at a presentation a couple of years ago given by David Yeager, who worked with the Carnegie Foundation doing research on this concept of productive persistence. It was a great presentation. I took pictures of the handout, fortunately, because now I can't find the original. And I'll share that handout with you in this presentation and in our Canvas classroom, but I apologize in advance for the poor quality of the handout. So, the basic premise of the handout is, as a teacher, you're already giving feedback to your students. But unlike the very detailed, helpful recommendation feedback that we talked about, this idea of productive persistence feedback is just editing the feedback that you already give, just tweaking it slightly to send a message that supports productive persistence. Now, let's look at some examples. The first kind of feedback that we'll talk about is praising a student after they succeed at something. In productive persistence, you want to focus on the process that the student used. Students can control process. They can't control, sort of whether they're naturally smart at something or not. Yeager defined the process as being a sustained effort using good strategies and getting help when needed to improve the strategies. One's innate ability, for example, whether a student is particularly talented in an area or not, should be completely irrelevant to the feedback. You can see that in this example. Rather than saying you're smart or you're clearly a math person, say something like you're really using some great strategies, or I can see you have the skills to do this. Think of some feedback that you might give in your class. What is a typical way that you might praise a student after they have a success in a way that will encourage productive persistence? It's always a pleasure to praise a student for good work. A little more challenging is encouraging students through difficult times. As a mother of a school-age child, I face this all the time at home. Fortunately, my son's school teaches productive persistence. They even have bulletin boards about the growth mindset posted in the hallways. Again, in this kind of feedback, you want to focus on the strategies. For example, no matter where you start, you can use the right strategies and improve with effort. It's also good to share brain science around this learning, and that when you are learning, it's building new pathways in the brain. The feedback of the feeling of math being hard is the feeling of your brain growing really emphasizes that aspect. Also, noting the incremental process of learning can be helpful, highlighting some improvement while noting that there's still progress to be made. Think of some feedback that you might give in your class. What is a typical way that you might encourage students during difficult times in a way that encourages productive persistence? Finally, there's the idea of critical feedback, where you are saying that the work was really bad. You want to coax students to a higher standard than the one that they are reaching. Remind students about the strategies that you have talked about in your class that will support them in doing better on this work. Again, think of some feedback that you might give in your class. What is a typical way that you might give critical feedback in a manner that encourages productive persistence? So, those are some ways that you can alter the feedback that you're already giving to students in a way that will help them persist through difficulty and succeed in their schooling. Now, all feedback takes time, but the nice thing about this is that it doesn't really take any more time than you're already spending giving feedback. But if you wanted to spend more time, this could be the launching pad to the more substantive feedback that we talked about in the other lecture, or that Brookfield talks about in this week's reading.